Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. Silent streams of the mountain. The mountains always seemed eternal. They stood with their ridges folded like the pages of an ancient book, the streams coursing through their hidden valleys whispering to those who would listen. For the villagers who lived at their base, these mountains were more than a landscape, they were guardians, storytellers, and a reminder that time moved differently here than in the hurried world beyond the hills. Akira had not seen the mountains in nearly 20 years. When he was a boy, he had spent countless afternoons walking the stone paths that wove between rice paddies and cedars, his wooden sandals scuffing against the earth. He had leaned over wooden bridges to watch silverfish dart beneath the water. And he had traced the sound of streams until he found their source clear pools tucked beneath moss-covered rocks, their surfaces broken only by falling droplets or drifting petals. Back then, he thought the streams would always be waiting for him, unchanged, no matter how long he stayed away. But when he left for the city, 1 year stretched into two into 10, and soon the decades slipped away. He built a life of schedules and numbers, of contracts and deadlines, until even his dreams smelled of paper and ink. Only when the noise became unbearable, the ceaseless hum of trains, the endless shouting of advertisements, the hollow echoes of crowded streets, did he remember the silence of the mountains. So now, at 40, he returned. The return. The train left him at a small wooden station, its roof lined with moss, its platform deserted. Akira stepped down with a single bag, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. A thin mist clung to the slopes, and somewhere nearby, he could hear the water, the streams, flowing as they always had. He walked the path toward his old village. The road was narrower than he remembered, edged with wildflowers that bowed under the weight of dew. Along the way, he passed terraced fields where bent-backed farmers tended their crops in silence. They looked up at him briefly, offering quiet nods of recognition or perhaps simply courtesy. At the heart of the village stood his childhood home. The wooden beams sagged slightly, and the roof tiles were faded, but the house was alive. Lanterns hung by the door, swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, his father sat by the hearth, older and frailer than Akira remembered, yet his eyes still carried the strength of the mountain streams. "You have returned," his father said simply. Akira bowed deeply. "Yes, father. I have returned." No more words were needed. Silence filled the room, and in that silence, 1,000 unspoken things passed between them. The streams. That evening, unable to sleep, Akira wandered out into the night. The moon cast a pale glow over the mountains, and the streams shone like threads of silver weaving through the dark. He followed the sound of running water, his feet carrying him toward the familiar paths of his youth. The streams were as he remembered, soft, tireless voices flowing through stone and moss. He crouched by the water's edge, dipped his hand into the cold current, and felt the years wash away. A memory returned, his mother's voice, calling him to gather water in a wooden pail. She had taught him to kneel respectfully before the stream, as though greeting an elder. "The water has traveled farther than we can imagine," she used to say. "From mountain snow to river to sea, it carries the world in its flow. Treat it gently, for it carries us too." She was gone now, many years gone. But as Akira listened to the water, he felt her presence in the sound, as though the streams themselves carried her whisper. The village festival. Within a week of his return, the village prepared for the spring festival. Lanterns were hung along the narrow streets, and paper banners fluttered in the mountain breeze. The streams were decorated. 2 children floated small wooden boats with candles down the currents, sending prayers of gratitude to the mountains and the ancestors. Akira joined the preparations hesitantly at first. He helped repair a bridge with young men who joked and laughed easily, reminding him of his youth. He visited the shrine where the head priestess, an elderly woman with eyes bright as river stones, welcomed him back without surprise. "The mountains knew you would return," she said. "The streams never forget those who once listened." That night, as drums echoed against the valley walls and dancers moved in circles around bonfires, Akira stood by the stream again. He watched as the candle boats drifted past, each flame trembling in the water's current. A boy standing nearby asked him quietly, "Where do the boats go?" "To the river," Akira said. Then, after a pause, he added, "And beyond." The boy nodded, as if that answer was enough. The pilgrimage upward. One morning, Akira decided to follow the stream back to its source. He told his father he would return before nightfall, packed a small pouch of rice balls, and set out at dawn. The path wound upward through forests of cypress and cedar, where sunlight filtered through the branches in golden shafts. The sound of the stream guided him, rushing where it narrowed between rocks, soft where it spread into shallow pools. He paused often, not out of weariness but to listen. By midday, he reached a place he had not seen since childhood, a hidden clearing where the stream poured down from a small waterfall into a crystal basin. Moss-covered stones encircled the pool like guardians. Here, the silence was deeper, broken only by the water's steady song. Akira knelt by the basin, drinking from the stream as he had when he was a boy. The water was sharp, cold, and alive. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he felt not just refreshed but renewed. He thought of the years he had spent away, chasing things that slipped from his grasp as quickly as water through fingers. Here, in this place, he understood the mountain did not hurry, the stream did not cling. They flowed simply because that was their nature. Perhaps, he thought, his own life could be the same. The farewell. Weeks turned into months. Akira stayed in the village, helping his father, walking the mountain paths, learning once again to live by the rhythm of the streams. The noise of the city faded from his memory like a dream. One evening, as fireflies rose from the grass and the streams glowed with their reflections, his father spoke quietly. "You have found peace here." "Yes," Akira replied. "I had forgotten what silence felt like." His father nodded. "Silence is not emptiness. It is fullness, the fullness of the mountain, the fullness of the stream." Not long after, his father passed away, as gently as a leaf falling into water. The villagers gathered to mourn, their prayers carried by the stream's endless current. Akira stood alone by the riverbank, listening. He realized then that the silence of the mountain would remain with him, even if he left again. Epilogue. Years later, travelers passing through the mountain village sometimes spoke of a man they saw walking by the streams. He moved slowly, as though listening to something only he could hear. Some said he was a hermit, others that he was simply a villager who loved the mountains too much to leave. But those who drew near swore they heard him whisper to the water, not with words of longing, but with words of gratitude. And always, the streams replied. Mist over the tea garden. The mist always came before dawn. It arrived like a secret guest, settling softly over the emerald slopes of the tea garden, cloaking the earth in a pale silver veil. From a distance, the terraces resembled waves on a silent sea, the mist curling through them like breath through silk. For those who rose early enough, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between night and morning. Hiroshi had not walked these paths in 20 years. Yet when his boots pressed into the moist earth of the hillside, it felt as though no time had passed. The faint scent of wet tea leaves rose to greet him, mingled with the cool tang of dew. The mist pressed close, whispering with the voices of memory. He had come home. The return. Hiroshi's life in the city had been a restless one, long hours beneath harsh fluorescent lights, endless meetings, the dull weight of schedules. At first, he had embraced it. The city offered movement, ambition, the illusion of control. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the noise of traffic faded to a distant hum, he often dreamed of the tea gardens of his youth. His grandfather had once tended these slopes. Hiroshi remembered watching him walk the fields at dawn, his back straight despite the years, his hands steady as he plucked the tender green leaves. He never hurried, never forced the day to move faster than it wished. "The tea teaches us patience," he would say. "Rush, and you ruin the leaf. Listen, and you learn its secrets." Now the gardens were almost empty. His grandfather was gone. Many families had left for the cities, and the fields had grown quieter with each passing year. Still, the tea remained, rooted deeply in the mountain soil. And so had Hiroshi's memories. Meeting Aiko. As he wandered along the narrow stone path between terraces, Hiroshi saw a figure bending among the rows. A woman, younger than him but not a girl, moving with careful grace. She plucked leaves with a practiced rhythm, slipping them into the wicker basket at her side. She looked up when he approached. "You must be Hiroshi-san," she said. "Your father wrote that you were coming." Her voice was soft, but steady, like water flowing over stones. She introduced herself as Aiko, caretaker of the gardens since his father's illness. She had lived in the village all her life, helping her family in the fields before eventually taking charge of what remained. "I thought I would find the place abandoned," Hiroshi admitted. "But it looks alive." "It is alive," Aiko said simply. "The tea remembers. Even when people forget." Her words lingered in the mist, and Hiroshi found himself smiling for the first time in many months. The garden's voice. Over the following days, Hiroshi rose before dawn and walked the garden with Aiko. Together, they tended the fields, plucking leaves, clearing stones from the narrow irrigation channels, listening to the subtle hum of insects waking with the light. At first, his movements were clumsy, the city still clinging to him like an ill-fitting coat. But slowly, under Aiko's patient guidance, he began to remember. The tea had its rhythm. Each leaf was a small gift, each breath of mist a reminder of the cycle that stretched far beyond him. One morning, while they worked side by side, Aiko asked, "Why did you come back?" Hiroshi paused, looking at the green slopes melting into fog. "I thought I left this behind. But the truth is he never did. The city drained me. I forgot how to listen." "And now?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Now I want to remember." The mist wrapped around them, cool and quiet, as though the garden itself had heard his vow. The tea ceremony. Weeks passed. The harvest approached. One evening, Aiko invited Hiroshi to her small wooden house on the edge of the garden. She prepared a tea ceremony, each movement deliberate, reverent. Hiroshi watched as she poured hot water into a ceramic bowl, whisking the powdered leaves into a froth that gleamed emerald under the lantern light. "Tea is not only for drinking," Aiko said. "It is for listening. It carries the spirit of the garden." When Hiroshi lifted the bowl to his lips, he felt the warmth spread through him, not just on his tongue, but in his chest. His hands, even in the memories he had tried to bury. The taste was delicate, but beneath it was something deeper: earth, rain, time. It was as if the garden itself flowed through him. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The story of the mist. One morning, when the mist lay especially thick, Aiko shared a story. Long ago, the people here believed the mist was the breath of the mountains. They said the spirits of our ancestors drifted down with it, watching over the tea. That is why the gardens are never truly empty. Even when no one walks them, the mist carries the presence of those who came before. Hiroshi listened in silence. He thought of his grandfather, of his mother's gentle hands, of the countless mornings he had run through these fields as a boy. Perhaps they were still here, lingering in the shifting veil of silver. He bowed his head. Then I am not alone. No, Aiko said. None of us are. A choice. By the end of the season, Hiroshi knew he could not return to his old life. The city seemed unreal now, a shadow compared to the living pulse of the garden. One evening, as they stood overlooking the fields glowing under the fading sun, he turned to Aiko. I want to stay, he said. Not just for a season, for as long as the garden will have me. Aiko studied him quietly, her expression unreadable at first. Then she smiled. The tea accepts those who are willing to listen. If you are patient, it will teach you. And so it was decided. The mist again. Months later, Hiroshi awoke one morning to find the garden blanketed in mist once more. He walked among the terraces, his hands steady, his steps sure. The air was cool, heavy with the fragrance of leaves and earth. Somewhere in the distance, Aiko was already at work, her figure half hidden by the shifting veil. The mist curled around him, soft and endless, and for a moment Hiroshi felt the weight of years dissolve. He was a boy again, running barefoot through the fields, his grandfather's voice calling after him, the earth beneath him alive. The garden was no longer a memory. It was present. It was the future. It was him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the mist fill him. And in that breath, Hiroshi understood the tea, the garden, the mist. They were all part of a single song. A song that had always been there, waiting for him to listen. Epilogue. Years would pass, but the mist would return each morning, as faithful as the rising sun. Travelers from the city sometimes came to see the gardens, marveling at their quiet beauty, sipping tea brewed from the leaves Hiroshi and Aiko tended together. And those who stayed long enough to rise before dawn, to walk the terraces in silence, would sometimes swear they heard voices in the mist. Gentle, patient voices, whispering of earth and rain, of time and memory. The voices of those who had always been there, breathing with the garden. Hiroshi never doubted them. For each morning, when the mist curled low and soft over the tea, he too felt the presence of his grandfather. His ancestors, and the countless hands that had shaped this land before him. The tea garden was eternal, not because it resisted time, but because it flowed with it like the mist, like the breath of the mountains, like the quiet pulse of life itself. And Hiroshi, once a man lost in the city's noise, had finally found his place within it. The Crane's Evening Song. Prologue. At the edge of the northern marshlands, where the river breaks into silver streams, and reeds sway with the breath of the wind, there lived an old man named Daichi. His hut stood alone, fashioned of wood that smelled of smoke and earth, with a thatched roof patched by his own hands. Few came that way, for the marsh was quiet and remote, a place where only the wind, the water, and the cries of cranes kept company. Daichi had chosen this solitude, though once he had been surrounded by the bustle of a village, the laughter of children, the warmth of family. But life had thinned, as rivers thin in summer drought. His wife had gone before him, his son had left for the distant city, and the old man, weary of stone roads and voices that hurried too fast, had come to dwell where silence spoke more gently. Every evening, when the sun descended and the world grew soft with shadows, Daichi would sit at the doorway of his hut and watch the cranes. They gathered upon the water's edge, their tall bodies casting delicate lines against the twilight sky. When they lifted their voices long, resonant calls that drifted across the reeds, the sound pierced him with something he could neither name nor hold. The villagers called it the crane's evening song. To Daichi, it was more than a song. It was memory, prayer, and promise all woven together. Chapter 1: The Return of the Cranes. One spring, after the snow had melted from the mountains and the river loosened from its icy grasp, the cranes returned. Their wings cut through the sky like strokes of ink upon a pale page, and their shadows stretched long across the thawing fields. Daichi raised his face and smiled, as he always did. "They remember," he murmured. "No matter how far they fly, they always return." That night, when the air smelled of damp earth and young shoots, Daichi dreamt of his wife. She was young again, her hair dark as a raven's feathers, her eyes bright with laughter. She stood among the reeds, and cranes circled above her. One descended, its white wings glowing, and settled beside her. She reached out her hand, as though greeting an old friend, and the bird bowed its head. When Daichi awoke, the dream lingered like mist. He felt an ache, not of sorrow, but of yearning, as if the cranes carried with them messages from beyond the veil of years. Chapter 2: The Stranger. Several days later, Daichi heard footsteps near the marsh. It was unusual, for few ever came that way. From the path emerged a young woman carrying a pack upon her shoulders. She was travel-worn, her clothes dusted with the road, but her gaze was steady, as if she walked with purpose. "Good evening, grandfather," she greeted, bowing politely. "May I rest here for a while? I have followed the cranes, and they led me to your hut." Daichi was startled. "Followed the cranes?" "Yes," she replied. "I am Aiko, a painter. I seek to capture their flight, their song, their spirit. But more than that, I feel they guide me somewhere I have yet to understand." The old man studied her, and something in her voice reminded him of his wife, gentle, but unyielding. He nodded. "Then you are welcome. The marsh belongs to those who listen." That evening, the two sat outside as the sun bled into gold and crimson. The cranes gathered, their silhouettes dark against the fire of the horizon. Then their voices rose, long and resonant, filling the air with haunting beauty. Aiko closed her eyes. It is as though they carry the world's sorrow and its hope together. Daichi's heart stirred. Yes. I have listened to them for many years, but still I do not know whether their song is farewell or homecoming. Chapter 3: The Painting. In the days that followed, Aiko remained. She set up her canvas near the marsh, brushes in hand, capturing the long necks of the cranes, the way their wings caught the evening light. Daichi watched her work, fascinated by the patience in her strokes. "You paint as though you know them," he remarked. "I wish to," she said softly. "When I was a child, my mother would tell me that cranes live 1,000 years. She said their song could carry prayers to the heavens. After she passed, I dreamed often of cranes. Perhaps that is why I follow them." Daichi listened in silence, for her words mirrored his own heart. He had long felt that his wife's spirit brushed the edges of the crane's wings. One evening, as the cranes began their chorus, Aiko dipped her brush and paused. "I wish to paint not only their bodies but their song. Tell me, grandfather, what do you hear in it?" Daichi closed his eyes. The call of the cranes rose, echoing across the marsh. "I hear time itself. The sorrow of things passing, the joy of things returning, the silence between heartbeats. It is the voice of the world reminding us that nothing is ever lost." Aiko's brush moved again, swift and sure, as though the cranes themselves guided her hand. Chapter 4: The Storm. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the marsh. The sky darkened, the reeds bent beneath the wind, and the water churned with restless waves. The cranes, unsettled, circled overhead before seeking shelter. Aiko and Daichi secured the hut as best they could, but the storm was fierce. Rain lashed the roof, and thunder shook the earth. Amid the tempest, Daichi felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to hide it, but Aiko saw and rushed to his side. "Grandfather, you must rest." He waved her off weakly. "No, I must hear them. The cranes. If this is my last night, I would not miss their song." Tears filled Aiko's eyes, but she stayed by him, holding his hand as the storm raged. And then, through the roar of wind and rain, came a sound faint but clear. The cranes, undaunted, lifted their voices into the storm. Their calls pierced the chaos, steady, unbroken. Daichi wept. Even in the storm, they sing. Even in the darkness, they do not forget. Chapter 5: The Farewell. When the storm passed, the marsh lay hushed, reeds heavy with water, earth dark and soaked. Daichi's strength waned in the days that followed. He knew his time was drawing near, and he was not afraid. One evening, as the sky glowed with fading light, he sat once more at the doorway. The cranes gathered, their song rising into the still air. "Aiko," he whispered, "do you hear them? They are calling me." She clutched his hand. "No, grandfather. They are not taking you away. They are carrying your voice to the heavens, just as they carried my mother's." Daichi smiled faintly. "Then I go where she waits. Do not grieve, child. Listen for the cranes, and you will hear me too." As the last note of their song lingered in the air, Daichi's breath grew quiet, and his spirit slipped gently into the twilight. Chapter 6: The Song Continues. Aiko wept, but in her heart, there was also peace. She buried the old man near the marsh, beneath the shade of a willow, where the cranes often lingered. Upon his grave, she placed her painting, a canvas alive with wings and twilight, the echoes of their song forever caught in color. Seasons turned. The cranes came and went, as they always had. Aiko remained, painting, listening, learning. She carried forward the memory of Daichi, of her mother, of all those whose voices the cranes bore upon their wings. Travelers sometimes passed through and marveled at her paintings, asking what gave them such depth. She would smile and answer, "It is not I who paints. It is the cranes. Their evening song is in every stroke." And when dusk fell, and the air grew tender with shadows, Aiko would stand at the marsh's edge. The cranes would gather, lifting their voices to the sky. She would close her eyes, and in the resonant call she heard not only sorrow but also joy, not only farewell but also homecoming. For the crane's evening song was never an ending. It was the endless reminder that all things, though they pass, return. Epilogue. Far above the reeds, the cranes spread their wings. Their cries echoed across the marsh, over mountains and rivers, across time itself. Those who listened with open hearts could hear within it the voices of loved ones, the breath of memory, the promise of return. And so the marsh endured, the song endured, and the story of the cranes and the old man and the painter wove itself into the eternal twilight of the world. The cranes flew, the evening deepened, and the song lingered on unbroken, eternal, beautiful. Whispers among the pines. Prologue. In the northern reaches of the mountains, where the mist drifts low across the ridges, and the sound of rivers falls like eternal music, there stood a pine forest. The trees grew tall and steadfast, their needles sighing softly in the wind. Travelers who came upon that forest would often stop at its edge, for the air seemed to change there. A hush lingered, not silence exactly, but a quiet shaped by the voices of the pines. The people of nearby villages spoke of the forest with reverence. They said that the trees held memories within their bark, that if one listened carefully, the pines would whisper the stories of the past, tales of love, loss, and the slow turning of the world. Few dared to wander deep, but those who did often returned changed, their eyes distant, as if they had glimpsed truths too vast for words. It was into this forest that a young man named Ren wandered one autumn, seeking refuge from the world he no longer understood. Chapter 1: The Mountain Path. Ren had been a scholar in a city far to the south. His life had once been filled with books, ink, and endless conversation. Yet the noise of the city, the restless ambition of man, had grown too heavy on his heart. The death of his teacher, a man who had guided him with kindness, had been the final thread cut. Ren packed little: a worn cloak, a flask of water, a small bundle of rice. With tired steps, he followed the old mountain path north, where the pines were said to stand like guardians against the sky. On the third evening, as the sun dissolved into amber and shadow, he reached the edge of the forest. The air shifted the moment he stepped beneath the first branches. The cries of distant birds faded. Even the sound of his breathing seemed hushed. He paused, lifting his gaze upward. The towering trunks rose like pillars, their crowns brushing against the fading light. And through the silence, he thought he heard something soft, faint, a sound that was not quite the wind. A whisper. Ren frowned, listening harder. It might have been the needles stirring. It might have been his imagination. Yet as he stepped further, the sound followed him, weaving between the trunks as though unseen voices murmured secrets only the forest could know. Chapter 2: The Hermit. Ren did not expect to find another soul in such a place. Yet as he followed a narrow path winding through the undergrowth, he saw smoke rising between the trees. It led him to a small hut, its roof patched with pine branches, its walls no more than rough planks. Before it sat an old man, thin and bent, his beard long and white. He was feeding twigs into a small fire, and he looked up with eyes that shone like dark water. "You have heard them too," the old man said before Ren could speak. His voice was calm, as if stating something obvious. Ren hesitated. "The whispers?" The old man nodded. "Yes. The forest speaks. Most pass it by. Few listen." Ren bowed. "I am Ren. I seek a place of quiet." "You have found it," the hermit replied. "Sit. The fire will warm you." So Ren sat, and the hermit offered him tea brewed from herbs gathered in the forest. They drank in silence until the evening deepened. At last, the hermit spoke again. "My name is Shin. I came here long ago, when the weight of the world became too heavy. At first, I thought myself alone. But the pines kept me company. Their voices carried memories older than mine. If you stay, you will hear them more clearly. They do not shout. They only whisper." Ren looked out at the trees, where shadows stretched and the wind carried faint sighs. For the first time in many weeks, he felt his chest loosen, as though he could breathe without burden. Chapter 3: Whispers of the Past. Ren stayed with Shin. Days passed slowly, marked by the rhythm of small tasks: gathering wood, fetching water from the stream, tending the small patch of vegetables. The silence of the forest seeped into him. One evening, as the wind picked up, Ren walked alone between the trees. He closed his eyes and listened. The whispers were stronger now, weaving through the branches. At first, they were indistinct, like water slipping over stones. But the end clearer. He heard laughter. Children running, their voices bright. A woman's song, low and steady, like a cradle lullaby. Then, as swiftly, he heard weeping. A man calling out in despair. The sound faded into the creak of wood and the groan of trees in the wind. Ren opened his eyes, unsettled. "Am I dreaming?" he whispered. When he told Shin, the old man nodded knowingly. "The forest remembers," Shin said. "It holds the echoes of all who have passed through it. Some are joys, some sorrows. The pines are keepers of memory. To walk here is to walk among the past." Ren thought of his teacher, of the many voices that had once filled his life. Were they, too, now held somewhere in the quiet spaces of the world? The thought comforted him, and yet it ached. Chapter 4: The Woman in White. As autumn deepened, Ren ventured farther into the forest. One dusk, beneath the crimson canopy, he saw a figure. A woman, dressed in white robes, her hair long and dark. She walked slowly among the trees, her hand brushing the trunks as though greeting old friends. Ren called out, but she did not turn. She moved with a grace too steady, too silent, to be entirely mortal. When she vanished into the mist, only the whispers remained, stronger than before, as if stirred by her presence. That night, Ren spoke of her to Shin. The hermit's face grew still. "You have seen her. Many do not. They say she is the spirit of the forest, a guardian, or perhaps a memory made flesh. She appears to those who seek answers in the pines." "What answers?" Ren asked. "That depends on the heart that listens," Shin replied. Chapter 5: Lessons Among the Pines. Winter came, cloaking the forest in frost. The pines stood steadfast, their needles dusted in white. Ren learned to live with the rhythm of the seasons. Yet always he listened to the wind, to the soft voices that seemed to speak not only of the past but of the present. One night, sitting by the fire, Shin asked, "Why did you come here, Ren? What do you seek?" Ren was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "I thought I sought silence. But perhaps I sought understanding. My teacher died, and with him the certainty of the world. In the city, all words became empty. Here, the whispers feel truer than the speeches of men." Shin nodded slowly. "The forest teaches patience. It teaches us that every voice, no matter how small, becomes part of a greater song." And in the stillness that followed, Ren realized he no longer felt entirely alone. Chapter 6: The Farewell. When spring returned, the forest filled with new life. Birds sang, rivers swelled, and blossoms appeared among the undergrowth. Ren felt stronger, clearer, as though he, too, had been renewed. But one morning, he found Shin lying quietly in his hut, his breathing shallow. The old man smiled faintly. "My time has come," Shin whispered. "Do not grieve. Listen to the pines. You will hear me among them." Ren clasped his hand. "I will." By nightfall, Shin was gone. Ren buried him at the foot of a great pine, where the whispers seemed gentlest. And as the wind passed through the branches, Ren thought he heard a new voice, soft, steady, like Shin's, blending with the chorus of the forest. Chapter 7: The Keeper. Ren remained in the forest. The hut became his own, the fire his companion. Travelers sometimes wandered near, pausing to rest, and he welcomed them with tea, just as Shin once had. And often, as dusk fell, he would walk among the trees. The whispers were always the voices of laughter, sorrow, memory, and promise. Sometimes he glimpsed the woman in white, moving like mist between the trunks, and he no longer feared her presence. Years passed, and Ren grew older. Yet the forest did not change. The pines whispered as they always had, carrying forward the voices of those who had come before. Ren understood then what his teacher might have said, what Shin had shown him, that nothing is ever truly lost. All things, all voices, become part of the endless murmur of the world. Epilogue. On his final evening, as twilight deepened, Ren sat at the base of the great pine where Shin was buried. He closed his eyes and listened. The whispers rose around him, soft and unending. He heard his teacher's gentle voice, Shin's laughter, the song of the woman in white. He heard himself, too, folded into the chorus, becoming one with the pines. And when at last his breath faded, the forest carried him into memory, into the eternal whisper of the wind among the trees. The pines stood tall, their needles sighing softly, keeping the voices of the world alive. And to those who would come after, wandering weary into the quiet forest, the whispers would speak again, gentle, timeless, guiding. The whispers among the pines never ceased. Lanterns on the river. Prologue. The river wound like a silver ribbon through the valley, glinting beneath moonlight and the faint glow of lanterns drifting across its surface. Every year, when summer leaned toward autumn, the people of the village gathered at its banks. They lit lanterns of rice paper and wood, carrying whispered prayers and unspoken memories, and set them upon the water. To the villagers, the river was not only a source of life but a threshold between the living and the departed. The lanterns were messages, borne downstream to realms unseen. This year, among the crowd stood a young woman named Aya, her hands trembling as she held a lantern close to her chest. The flame inside quivered with her uncertainty, reflecting not only grief but a yearning for something she could barely name. Chapter 1: The Return. Aya had been gone for many years. She left the village as a girl, chasing dreams of study and independence in the faraway city. She had promised her parents she would return often, but time had a way of slipping by. Letters became sparse, visits rarer. And then, the letter arrived that shattered her. Her father had passed quietly during the last winter. Now, months later, Aya had returned for the Lantern Festival. It was her mother who urged her to attend. "Your father loved the river," she said. "He would want your lantern among the others." As Aya walked along the worn path to the river bank, she felt a strange pull in her chest. As if the waters themselves remembered her, as if the current whispered her name. Chapter 2: The Festival of Light. The villagers had gathered long before dusk, their laughter mingling with the scent of grilled fish, roasted chestnuts, and the faint smoke of incense. Children ran barefoot, carrying unlit lanterns like secret treasures. The elders sat on woven mats, recounting stories of past festivals, their voices warm and steady. At the edge of the crowd, Aya hesitated. She felt like an outsider, both part of this world and apart from it. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go, Aya. This is not just about remembrance, it is about belonging." Aya nodded, though words caught in her throat. When the sun sank and twilight thickened, the river became a mirror. The first lantern was set afloat by the village priest. carrying a prayer for peace and the safe passage of all souls. Then, one by one, the villagers followed. Lanterns touched the water like stars being lowered from heaven, each flame a fragile universe of hope. Aya knelt by the bank, holding her lantern. She whispered, "Father, forgive me for the distance. May this light reach you." Then she set it free. The current caught it gently, carrying it downstream to join the constellation of floating lights. Aya's eyes blurred, and for a moment she thought she saw her father's reflection smiling in the river. Chapter 3: The Stranger. As the lanterns drifted, Aya noticed a figure standing apart from the others. An elderly man in a dark robe, leaning on a carved staff, his face lined yet serene. Unlike the villagers, he did not hold a lantern. Instead, he watched the river with eyes that seemed to pierce beyond its surface. Aya approached him. "Sir, don't you have a lantern to release?" The man smiled faintly. "My lanterns have long been set adrift. Tonight I come only to listen." "Listen?" Aya asked. "To the river's memory," he said. "Every flame carries a voice, and the river gathers them all. If you are still enough, you may hear what has been forgotten." Aya shivered, unsure whether to believe him. But when she returned her gaze to the water, she thought she did hear something, a distant echo, like a chorus of voices carried on the current. Chapter 4: Echoes of the Past. That night, Aya could not sleep. She left her mother's house and walked to the river. The lanterns had floated far downstream, but the glow lingered faintly in the distance. She knelt at the bank, listening. At first, there was only the rhythm of water. But slowly, a whisper emerged. "Aya." Her breath caught. It was her father's voice, gentle and patient. "You are not lost, my daughter. You have only wandered. The river always remembers its source, and so will you." Tears welled in Aya's eyes. She reached toward the current but touched only water, cold and endless. Yet in that moment, her loneliness eased. Chapter 5: The Old Man's Tale. The next morning, Aya found the old man sitting beneath a pine tree. She bowed respectfully. "Last night, I think I heard something," she confessed. He nodded knowingly. "The river shows what the heart is ready to hear." He told her a tale long ago. A boy from the village had drowned in a flood. His family mourned, but each year they set a lantern on the water. One evening, the mother heard the boy's laughter ripple with the current. From that day, she visited the river not with sorrow, but with gratitude, knowing that love never truly vanished. Aya listened, her chest heavy yet lightened by the story. "Will the river always speak?" she asked. "Only if people continue to remember," he replied. "Memory and water are not so different, they flow, they change shape, but they endure." Chapter 6: The Unspoken. Days passed. Aya helped her mother with chores, reconnected with childhood friends, and felt the village life seep back into her bones. Yet she also wrestled with guilt. Had she betrayed her father by leaving? Had she chosen ambition over family? One evening, she returned to the river with another lantern. This time she carried no words, only silence. As she placed it on the water, she let her tears fall freely. The flame did not falter. Instead, it glowed brighter, as if to say grief, too, has its light. Chapter 7 Downstream. On her final night before returning to the city, Aya stood again at the riverbank. Lanterns flickered like galaxies on the current, moving slowly out of sight. The old man appeared once more. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" "To carry the river within you. You need not stay here forever, Aya. What matters is that you remember. Each act of kindness, each breath of gratitude, these are also lanterns, set afloat in the world." Aya bowed deeply. "Thank you." He smiled, his figure blending into the shadows until he seemed part of the night itself. Aya never saw him again. Epilogue. Aya returned to the city, but she was no longer the same. She kept a small lantern on her desk, unlit, as a reminder. On difficult nights, she would close her eyes and hear the river's whispers, voices of her father, of the villagers, of all those who came before. Each year, she returned to the festival. Each year, she sets another lantern on the water. And each time, she understood a little more that memory flows, love endures, and the river never forgets. Lanterns on the river.